Hello everyone, this is Brutus, and welcome to the first part of my commentated playthrough of Bloodborne: The Old Hunters. I'm super duper excited to be bringing this to you guys. I've been wanting to do a walkthrough like this for a long time. I just never had the video capture equipment, but I have recently bought it and gotten my PC fixed, so here we are. Now the point of this playthrough is basically to play through the DLC and have a very lore-focused approach at looking at it. I will be pausing quite a bit and going on long rants and tangents and stuff, basically just talking about what I find interesting in the DLC. This isn't a blind playthrough, I have actually finished the DLC already, and I'm playing through a second time and trying to collect as many things as I possibly can. Let me know what you guys think of this format. I'm going to be putting a lot of effort into this particular walkthrough, but if it's not very well received and it's not really watched a lot, then I might just go back to short form. So, the DLC becomes available right after you finish Vicar Amelia. I'm actually way towards the end of the game. I'm actually right up to Murgo's Wet Nurse, and you can see I'm on level 130, and this is the character that I'll be playing through the DLC on. I've deliberately kept my vitality low in order to sort of balance out the difficulty curve and make sure that I'm not overpowered. I've also hoarded a lot of upgrade materials because the idea is that I really want to use every weapon as I get them. Right after you return to the dream after defeating Vicar Amelia, you get the key to the DLC, which is the Eye of the Blood-Drunk Hunter. Let's take a look at the item description for this. The Eye of a Blood-Drunk Hunter. Its pupil is collapsed and turned to mush, indicating the onset of the Scourge of Beasts. A hunter who goes drunk with blood is said to be taken by the nightmare, destined to wander forever, engaged in an endless hunt. It is a fate that no hunter can escape. So, straight away we've got a bunch of really juicy lore content for us to speculate on. Firstly, 100% confirmation that blindness and destruction of the pupil is the most visible and direct physical symptom of the Scourge of Beasts. We've gotten hints of this before. For example, in the start menu cutscenes, if you don't press any buttons, there's a extreme close-up of a Yarnamite villager's eye, which is clearly just turned to mush, and they can't say anything. But I think this also throws into question some of the theories that we've had about the nature of blindfolds and why people are blindfolding themselves. The practice we assumed started with Willem, because he has sort of his like papal headpiece that covers his eyes. But if it's a direct result of the Scourge of Beasts, then maybe there's sort of multiple reasons and motivations and sort of beliefs that people have behind the blindfolding of their eyes. Another thing that is brought up is this idea of blood-drunk hunters becoming trapped in the nightmare, and that being the ultimate inescapable fate of all hunters. It's especially interesting to think about how that ties in with Eileen's whole questline and what she's actually trying to do. And the motivation of the Hunter of Hunters seems to be attempting to liberate the souls of hunters and blood-drunk hunters from blasphemous Yharnam rituals by performing sky burial instead. So are they trying to free them from the influence of the hunter's nightmare, or are they simply trying to rid the waking world of these blood-drunk hunters by ascending them into the nightmare? And maybe that means that a great deal of the actual hunters that are trapped in the hunter's nightmare are in fact hunted by the hunters of hunters. I don't really know the answer to any of these questions. We actually don't get any further lore on the hunters of hunters throughout the rest of the DLC, so it's sort of all speculation, but there is a lot of really well-rounded lore, and lore that rounds out a lot of the missing spaces that were in the game's lore already, so I'm really excited to talk about that when we get to it. I also want to point out that I won't be commentating every single moment of gameplay footage. I'm just not confident enough in my own commentary and ability to speak that much. I'm going to end up with 3 or 4 hours worth of footage uploaded by the end, so, you know, it's just a lot of talking. I will be chiming in whenever something interesting happens that I really want to talk about in terms of the game's lore. Yeah, so without further ado, let's go to Cathedral Ward and get sucked up by the amygdala. So, as I said earlier, I'm actually up to Murgo's Wet Nurse on this character, which means that I've triggered the Pale Blood Sky and I'm able to see the Lesser Amygdala. I am also above 40 insight, so I'll be able to see it anyway. I'm interested as to whether they designed this amygdala with the intention of eventually having it lead to another content, or whether it was just sort of a neat coincidence that they decided to add in. Anyway, here we go.
Cursed fiends, their children too. And their children forever true.
「
And their children forever true. 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 」 . 」 . 」 .
And here we are in the Hunter's Nightmare. So this is obviously a nightmare version of Erich Chapel, and everything's a little bit off. Firstly, you can see some of the statues are different, and also there's no door that leads to the secret underground compartment that holds the gem workshop tool. I don't know what that means, whether it means that that room hasn't been built yet or just doesn't appear in the nightmare. There's a bit of that later on that I'll talk about, as sort of exactly what time period this nightmare is set in and whether things are missing just because they're missing or whether it's because it's set in the past. So I'm looking at some of the statues and they're different, and also this door that previously leads to Erich Chapel instead leads to another part of the level. So walking outside, we can see that the level is actually a collapsing version of Cathedral Ward. We can also see this weird crushed sun, and I don't really know what the significance of this is, but I think it's a really obvious reference to the Eye of the Blood Drunk Hunter. They have the exact same kind of crushed pattern. I think that it's just a visual parallel to tie the two together though. And here we have our first encounter with the first of the old hunter enemies that are in the DLC. I really like these guys, especially the guys that are using the beast cutter, which is what this guy has. They have really weird parry timings that are really hard to read. It's very delayed. I've practiced a bit, so I got this guy straight away, but you'll see later on I really struggle. The DLC is also really brutal. It's very, very hard, and even on NG I struggled a lot against some of the later enemies. So here we pick up the first piece of the new Old Hunter set, which is the cap. Let's just take a look at what the description says. Old Hunter cap with a wide brim that hides their sharp gaze. In the olden days, when hunters were 10 a penny, this was part of their standard garb. It's very weird to me that the old hunters are described as 10 a penny, aka they're very cheap and easy to come by, because I always assumed that hunting was something that became more popular over time. But now that I think about it, I think the hunters being referred to here are actually the specialized class of the old hunters, aka people like Erich and Gascoigne and stuff, who belong to a different generation of hunters, and the reason that they are described as 10 a penny is that they used to be very common, but now they are all dead or trapped in the nightmare, and there's only a few left in the waking world. I can't confirm that, but yeah, I think that's kind of likely. We can definitely say that most of the hunting being done in the present day in Yharnam is being performed by villages and militia. Either way, it's obvious that these hunters are out for blood. They're out on the hunt and they're slaying these beast patients that are wandering around. So it seems like the timeline of Cathedral Ward is that it's set sometime during the Ash and Blood pandemic long ago. Here we've just picked up the second piece of the old hunter set, which is the gloves. The description reads, at the time, some hunters believed that certain metals would ward off beast blood. On a night of the hunt, it is no wonder that some resort to superstition. Now I really like this, and I particularly like the idea that certain practices from the old hunters, which people in the present probably already know are not effective, are still performed out of a sense of tradition or superstition. It also goes some way to explain why the hunter set has metal gauntlets, which I always thought were out of place because the rest of the set is pure leather. I think it's a bit of a retcon, but I really like that explanation anyway. Here I'm just briefly showing you what my character looks like. Her name is Gloriana III. Gloriana is a character that I've roleplayed in every single Souls game. However, because I didn't really like Dark Souls 2, the Gloriana in that game is a bit of a bastard child. I don't count her as part of the official lineage of the Glorianas. I typically make this character to use the Moonlight Greatsword, but because Bloodborne did not have one until now, I made her to be a sort of jack-of-all-trades character instead. Here we've got a bunch of beast patients that are already dead, probably killed off by other hunters off-screen. I thought they were alive, which is why I attacked them. There's also these dogs here that I find really interesting because they don't seem to be infected at all with the Plague of Beasts. Their skin is very smooth, and actually they're missing their fur, so maybe they're in the very early stages of transformation. I can't really say for sure, but to me they kind of resemble zombie dogs from Dark Souls 1. This is really embarrassing. This guy's like one hit away from death, but I managed to miss him with big hits with the burial blade 3 times in a row. You gotta play unlocked though, that's where the top tier strats are at. I'm gonna find as many notes that I can find in the DLC as I can, just because a lot of players are in this area and struggling against the enemies, and it really helps to be healed up to full. So here you can see that that's the shortcut back to the Erden Chapel equivalent, but we're not going to go down there just yet. Instead, we're just going to pop down here into this alternate nightmare version of the main Cathedral Ward square, which has a lot less corpses in it, I think, but a lot more beast patients, a lot more being a non-zero amount. It's really interesting to me that the beast patients here cower from you even when you don't have a torch equipped. I think this means that these beast patients are either at a higher level of cognizance, so they've retained a lot of human fear, or in the future the beasts have lost their fear of humans due to a lack of exposure, but have retained their fear of fire. I also want to point out that the main gate to Central Yharnam that we open in the waking world with the Hunter Chief emblem is actually visible but blocked off by these bulbous rock formations. Same with a lot of the other entryways and exits into the level. I was really hoping that we could interact with the main gate a little bit, since I know that Ludwig is part of the DLC, but that's just not the case. The enemies here all seem to drop blood gems. They're kind of crap for me because I'm already end game, but I imagine that if you come here right after Vicar Amelia, even though you'll be underleveled, it'll be useful because you can get some gems, and gems, especially in the main game, are very lacking, and you really have to go into the very late game or the Chalice dungeons in order to get anything decent. I really like that all the enemies here actually fight each other as well. I've always wanted to see three-way fights in Souls games, but we've never really had them until now. I know that there's some instances of it in the Chalice dungeons, but those seem more like bugs to me than actual features. But this is really cool. Like, you have the option to either watch these beasts tear each other apart, or to join in on the fray and just have a big free-for-all. And either way, it's really, really, really fun. A little bit of a failed backstab there. So up until this point I've been getting pretty lucky with my encounters with all of the old hunter enemies, but they're a lot harder than I make them look at the beginning of this video. You'll see later on I start to really mess up a bit and struggle, and they hit very hard, and their parry timings are very strange and hard to get used to. So here we have an item with a pressure plate placed in front of it. You can see I accidentally found this node instead of finding it, and I felt really bad. I really wanted to find it, and I'm furiously trying to find a way to reset that vote, but apparently I can't, so what can you do? I was really excited when I saw that they were adding traps into the old hunters. I think that traps were severely lacking in the main game. There was no area that felt like Sin's Fortress to me, which came with both a sense of loss and relief. But unfortunately, the traps in the old hunters are actually pretty limited. There's only a couple of encounters that involve traps, so we still don't really have an area that feels like that. We've got an enemy here that's using a new firearm that we'll be able to acquire a little bit later. It's really cool, and I really like the way that it looks and the way that its bullets look. I think that it actually has longer range than any of the other guns, so I'm really excited to try it out and use it a bit. I'm taking in a bit of a panorama shot here, and I really, really adore the atmosphere and the ambience of this level. I think the closest thing that we get to a daytime level in the main game is the Nightmare Frontier, but this is a lot more unsettling than that, and I think it's really impressive that they managed to make a daytime setting with a lot of light feel very, very unsettling, probably even more so than actual nighttime. The skybox is also gorgeous with these touches of greens and blues and pinks. I love it. I find it so impressive. So as you can see, they've actually reused a lot of the level assets from Cathedral Ward, but we can't access a lot of it. Like, there's no ladder here that leads into this tower. So I'm squaring off against the Fire Hammer Hunter again, and having a lot more trouble with this time around. These guys are really tough. I'm going to be really careful around them. Getting hit by any of their buffed attacks, especially their buffed overhead swing with a huge explosion, would just absolutely end you. Would do a shit ton of damage. So he's actually dropped a vermin, which I find kind of weird. There's actually a few vermin that dropped throughout the DLC. I have the Impurity Rune equipped, but I'm not sure if they drop without it or not. Either way, I don't really know. It seems like Impurity Rune actually adds vermin as part of your overall drop loot with a very low percentage. I think this is so that solo players who don't have online functionality can still collect a lot of vermin and complete Volta's questline. So we've just picked up the first of the DLC weapons, which is the Beast Cutter. Let's take a look at the description. So it is a thick iron cleaver that transforms into a whip. This crude weapon relies on brute force and is regrettably inelegant, suggesting that the hunts of the earliest hunters made for horrific affairs painted in sanguine blacks and reds. This item description is so weirdly poetic, and I really like that the tone of the item descriptions actually changes. Like, some of them are very dry and very informative, but others like this are quite lyrical. So let's take this thing back to the Dream and upgrade it, and then we'll come back and give it a spin. So returning to the Hunter's Dream, I want to show you what I'm actually doing with each of the new weapons that I'm picking up. Basically, I've hoarded enough Bloodstone chunks to upgrade about a dozen weapons or so to +7. I'll then be equipping each of these weapons with top tier blood gems that I've farmed from the Chalice dungeons in order to emulate the damage output of a +8 or a +9 weapon, which is around about the difficulty that the DLC is designed for. I don't see much of a point in taking the weapons to +9, just because that costs 8 chunks, and for that amount I could upgrade at least 1, possibly 2 other weapons to +7 or +8. It just seems very wasteful. I also want to point out that the headstone we use to access all of the DLC areas is the same as the Waking World equivalent where we find the old Hunter Bone. Now this is a really big lore piece, and the main question that comes out of it for me is, whose body is it that's buried in the Waking Headstone? Whose bone do we pillage for the old Hunter Bone? A long time ago I speculated that it was Ludwig, but now I'm less sure because there are so many new candidates and we find out a few more things about Gehrman and his apprentices. And I'll talk about all of that as they come up later on in the playthrough. As we move through this nightmare world, I want to ruminate a bit on the nature of dreamscapes and nightmares in Bloodborne's world. So like a lot of things in Bloodborne, the dream worlds are pulled from some of Lovecraft's ideas, specifically his dream cycle, which were a series of stories that were concerned with the Dreamlands, which is this vast alternate dimension parallel to our own that is home to many of the great old ones and outer gods, and it can be accessed through dreaming. However, this world wasn't any less real than our own. It was just a parallel plane of existence that our consciousness could explore, but at great peril to ourselves. In Bloodborne, dreamscapes carry a similar function, apparently. There are different ways of accessing the dreams, though, and dream landscapes can be composed through different means. I'm going to talk a bit more about that later. In terms of actually accessing these dreams ourselves, humans seem to be able to ascend their consciousness or spirit into these planes. Obviously, we can as the players because we travel to these dreamlands and fight bosses and enemies in them. However, I'm not really sure what happens to our, specifically the player character's physical form in this process. But we can see from other NPCs that it's possible to exist in the Dreamlands even when your physical body is long dead. An example of this is Mikolash, who is nothing but a mummified corpse in the waking world, but is still very spry in his nightmare. We're actually just about to get some lore on this. But it's also obvious that it's possible for human consciousness and possibly even our physical bodies to become trapped in nightmares through the influence of a host or a great one. Like we the player, are trapped in the hunter's dream by the moon presence along with Gehrman, and our whole quest through the game is seeking to destroy the source of the nightmare and free ourselves. This is very similar to the plot setup in Demon's Souls, where we were bound to the Nexus until the old one was lowered back to slumber. Here we're picking up the final piece of the old hunter set, which is the garb. Let's see what the description says. One day the hunters disappeared, and Yharnamites began to whisper of the hunter's sin. Drunk with blood, chasing after beasts, they would pass on to the nightmare, every last one of them. This is confirming a lot of what I was just talking about with regards to hunters becoming trapped in nightmare, and it also begins to hint at some kind of single event where all of the old hunters just disappeared suddenly one day. I think this is more confirmation that it's possible for humans to physically become trapped in dreams as well as spiritually, and the mention of becoming trapped by sin clearly evokes an idea of hell and divine punishment, but by which gods? There's these two hunting villagers who push a flaming bow to trap down and then run towards the Grand Cathedral, only to be cut down by this new enemy, which is known as a bell wielder. These guys resemble the axe executioner enemies and are wearing the actual executioner's garb this time, but their axes are actually resonating bells, and they have a buff where all of their attacks cause these lingering hitboxes that really fuck you up. Like, you'll see this guy completely wrecks me in my first attempt, and I have to come back for him. Bells are obviously a recurring motif throughout the game, and they're used to communicate across planes and summon things from other worlds because of their ability to resonate across different dimensions. I think this idea was most likely inspired by Lovecraft's story, The Music of Erich Zann, which is about an old man who plays these discordant violin melodies in his house every night to keep away unknown creatures from another dimension outside his window. This idea in turn was probably drawing from the ideas of Pliny the Elder and his Music of the Spheres, which is more of a non-literal philosophical concept about celestial harmonies and perfect proportions and such. I'll leave a link to a really good piece of writing on this in the description, and I'll be talking about it a bit later in this playthrough because we get a lot more cool stuff about bells. Having finally defeated this guy, we can move up into the Grand Cathedral proper, where we get one of my favorite, if not my absolute favorite, cinematic moments in the game. This is something that the Souls games have always excelled at, these kind of breathtaking and awe-inspiring, but nonetheless subdued moments of discovery. I think a large portion of this is the fact that the game doesn't pry your eyes open and force you to look at them. I could be running through this area, but the game expects me to understand when something is important, or beautiful, or potentially dangerous on my own. A lesser game would have made this into a cutscene, or forced me to walk. But yeah, so this is some kind of flaming cleric beast who is sprawled across the Grand Cathedral altar. His pose is a direct one-to-one visual reference to Michelangelo's Pieta. Just Google Michelangelo's Pieta, you'll see what I mean immediately. We don't have the context for exactly who he was just yet, but it does recontextualize the headless statue that's on the altar, and what I want you to keep in mind and think about is this. If this character is Jesus, then who is the Mother Mary pouring liquid into his mouth? From the cleric beast's hand we pick up the eye pendant, which is an important key item for later. It reads, an eye pendant which unlocks the surgery altar. There are two cathedrals in the hunter's dream. One lies past the river of blood, and another contains the private research hall of the healing church. Only chosen members of the healing church or the lamentable patients can enter the research hall using this eye. Grants eyes to the surgery altar's skull. There is a lot here that I can't talk about just yet, but we get the first mention of there being two grand cathedrals here in the Hunter's Nightmare. One of them is the one we are in now, which lies past the River of Blood, while the other contains the research hall we will access later. I want to talk about the idea of cinematic moments in the Souls series a bit more. I think my absolute favorite moment in all the Souls games was the staircase leading into the Kiln of the First Flame with the ghosts of Black Knights that hauntingly walk across the screen. It's one of the most beautiful and lyrical and poetic experiences that I've had in any video game ever. Matthew Matosis, in his 6-hour commentary of Dark Souls, also mentioned why he likes this moment and the way that it's handled. It's really sublime, and I think something these games do really amazingly well is allowing the art direction to tell the story and impart an experience rather than relying on dialogue or flashy cutscenes. Here we have another one of these moments, an amazing panorama shot of the second Grand Cathedral in the distance, and also our first look at the River of Blood. This is such an excessively and overwhelmingly gorgeous shot and piece of level design. Over here, around this whole machine gun trap, we also see the carcass of a deceased amygdala. I assume this is one of the lesser amygdalas since we fight Mama Amygdala or Amig Mama in the Nightmare Frontier. This is actually a fascinating snapshot into the anatomy of these creatures. You can see that even though their limbs look fleshy and soft when they're alive, they're actually covered in a chitinous exoskeleton, and you can see the edges of the exoskeletal plates where the arms join at the back. These remains have also calcified into rock, and the hard pockmarked exterior skull has become a literal tonsil stone. The amygdalas are biologically based on arthropods in the same way that other kin like Ebrietus and the Celestial mobs are based off of cephalopods, which leads me to think that there are different species of kin and great ones that vary quite dramatically in biological makeup. Let's talk about this second Grand Cathedral and how it's possible. We need to go back to the nature of nightmare landscapes and expand on that a bit more. I think there's different kinds of nightmare geography in the same way that there are different ways of accessing nightmares. Most commonly, these dreamscapes are made up of distorted but familiar mirrored versions of waking landscapes. For example, this is a warped Cathedral Ward in central Yharnam, but those areas still exist in the waking world. The Hunter's Dream is also a close replica of Gehrman's original workshop, and this darkened building that is coming up and we'll go through is a replica of the one next to the lamp in central Yharnam. I think this kind of geography is conjured or constructed by the minds of either the dreamer or the host. However, I believe that it's also possible for real-world geography to be pulled into dreamscapes permanently. An example of this is the Nightmare Lecture Theatre. The Lecture Theatre key description says, "Today, the two-story lecture building is adrift in the nightmare, but once it was a place of reflection, where scholars learned of history and archaeology." It appears the lecture theatre no longer exists in the waking world. It's missing entirely from Bergenworth. It's also interesting that the lecture theatre is described as being adrift in nightmare. It's somehow become unshored and unanchored from reality and swept away in the ocean of nightmare. I think a similar thing happened with one of these grand cathedrals. The one we've just visited is a mirrored version of the one in the waking world, but the one we're heading to has actually been pulled into the nightmare, which is why there is only one Grand Cathedral in the waking realms. I'll provide evidence and justification for this later on in the playthrough. We get some associations between nightmares and bodies of water. Keep in mind there's also the descriptions of the lake and the deep sea runes that talk about how great bodies of water act as bulwarks guarding sleep. I think that this is all hinting at liquid, water and blood in particular, being mediums of travel between the waking realm and the dreamlands where the Great Ones actually reside. We jump into the moonlit lake and wind up in an impossible and obviously dreamlike space where Rom is somehow trapped. The Erden runes also talk about oozing blood. I think that is referring to menstrual blood, being the medium of Erden, which is why blood saints and Ariana have such a connection to the Great One. Here we have my absolute favorite of all the traps in the game. This is such a clever subversion of expectations, and it really got me good on my first playthrough. I let myself get hit this time just to demonstrate. I like how this trap fits into the idea of hard but fair. We've probably already fallen for the original trap, and our attention is focused on the wheelchair instead of the flammable urns nearby, which is what we should be looking for. We've also just been introduced to timed explosives, so we recognize the sound of the timer straight away. Here we picked up the boom hammer, which reads, "A trick weapon used by the old hunters and crafted by the workshop heretics, the powder kegs. A giant hammer equipped with a miniature furnace. When lighted and fired, it emits a volley of flame that explodes furiously upon impact. Crush the beasts, then burn them. The brute simplicity of the boom hammer was favored by hunters with an acute distaste for beasts. There's a bunch of interesting stuff about the powder kegs here that will be expanded on really soon, but if we remember that this is a distorted reenactment of the Ashenblood hunt, it confirms that the powder kegs participated in the scouring of Old Yharnam, or at least contributed by arming hunters. Not only that, but these hunters carried a violent hatred and distaste for the beasts. They really wanted to go out and violently kill these beasts instead of just doing it out of obligation. I've been saying for a while that I believe the powder kegs were partly responsible and possibly even directly commissioned to burn Old Yharnam down due to their explosive expertise, which is why Dura feels such guilt and protects these beasts in penance. Maybe what he means when he says, "I no longer dream," is that he's turned his back on the ways of the old hunt. He's renounced the life of a blood-drunk hunter and therefore has escaped the ultimate fate that all old hunters were met with, becoming trapped in this horrific hunter's hell where they degenerate into violent husks and are forced to relive their atrocious deeds forever. So now I'm wearing the old hunter top hat, which I just find really fucking comical that the old hunters are still wearing these fucking goofy ass ugly top hats. It's so funny to me and I don't know why. I think the Souls games do visual humor and gags really well, and there's so many armor sets that are just kind of silly that I really enjoy. We need to follow the River of Blood to progress through the level, but for now I want to duck into this hallway over here that actually leads back to the lamp. This hallway in the real world leads to the Old Church workshop, which would be where the River of Blood is here. I think there's a lot of interesting geographical symbolism in that I'll address next time. For now, let's take a look at this NPC here. He's kind of weird and shabby looking, but he has a lot to say, so let's hear him out.
You're a hunter with your sanity, aren't you? Must have taken a wrong turn then, eh? Well, we're more alike than you think. This is the hunter's nightmare, where hunters end up when drunk with blood. You've seen them before. Aimless, wandering hunters slavering like beasts. This is what the poor fools have to look forward to. So, don't be brash. Turn back before it's too late. Unless you've something of an interest in nightmares. Yes, as it should be. Hunt your beasts and think no more on the secrets of the night. That is the very best a hunter can do. Just don't let the blood intoxicate you. What now? Oh, take my word and turn back before it's too late. Unless, I suppose, you've taken an interest in nightmares. Oh yes, I see. You sense a secret within the nightmare and cannot bear to leave it be. As if the spirit of Bergenworth lives on within you. Such inquisitive hunters will relish the nightmare. But beware. Secrets are secrets for a reason, and some do not wish to see them uncovered, especially when the secrets are particularly unseemly. Beware. Secrets are secrets for a reason, and some do not wish to be discovered, especially when the secrets are particularly unseemly.
And with that, I think I'm going to wrap up the first episode of this playthrough. Tune into the next part where I'll be exploring more of the River of Blood and talking about its symbolic value in Place of the Nightmare, as well as taking on the DLC's first boss. This has been Brutus, and I will see you soon.